DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. And I'm glad to have you with us as we broadcast live, again, from my home. Busy show for us. We'll get Mike Griffith coming up here in just a little bit. Before we get to that, though, I do want to start the show by saying this, that one of the things I take really seriously is that the kind of from my media we produce around here is very different than other kinds of media. You think about, TV, you're sitting on your couch, TV's on the other side of the room. There's a little bit of distance between you and the screen. Sometimes the same thing can be true for radio as well. In your car, you're driving, the radio console is kind of all the way over to the middle part of the car. Unless you have one of those fancy knobs on the side of your steering wheel, you have to reach over there to change the channel. It's a little bit less intimate an experience. But many of you connect with our program the same way that I'm broadcasting right now. Headphones in, earbuds in, and you're really inviting DawgNation Daily into your brain almost, through your ears. And as I said before, that's a pretty intimate experience. And so with that in mind, one of the things I try to be very careful about is not wearing out the welcome, right? And, not annoying you unnecessarily, just given the fact that so many of you have been kind enough to allow me and my voice to, as annoying as it can probably sometimes be, exist in your earbuds wearing out these years. That means we think a lot about the audio quality of the show or the types of content that we produce. And, sometimes that even goes in the direction of controversial topics that we just choose to avoid. You should know this, that in terms of how I plan and prepare the show every day, one of the things that I always going to keep in mind is, given the fact that you've been nice enough to allow me to be with you at your office or in your car or with you at your gym or whatever that you're doing, it's almost like I'm a guest in your home, much the same way I'm at my home right now. It's almost like you've invited me over for dinner. And how would I speak to you if I was at your house for dinner? It's the same way that I want to speak to you on this show. I want to be polite. Doesn't mean that I'm going to lie and tell you things about me that are not true or pretend to have opinions that I don't actually have. But the way in which I discuss my opinions probably matters. I shouldn't unnecessarily agitate you the same way that I wouldn't do if I was a guest in your home for dinner. That means there's a lot of subjects that we could talk about here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, that for the most part, we just sort of let pass. We don't discuss them because, as I said before, they could, rise to the level of being just kind of an unnecessary agitation for a show that's really primarily supposed to be about football, what happens between the white lines and the games that are played. Take for this past weekend, for instance, Sarah Fuller makes her debut as the Vanderbilt kicker. It's one of the most viral sports stories of the week. For the most part, we haven't really mentioned that, or to my knowledge, I don't know that we've even mentioned it at all on this show. Frankly, I don't care enough about it to tell you my feelings on Fisher kicking, whether it's a good thing or not, whether I don't care to talk about that very much, because it's the kind of thing that would potentially unnecessarily agitate people on either side of the subject. I am, for the most part, willing to let that go. Unless something like that kind of lands right there at our doorstep and becomes an actual issue that potentially impacts Georgia football. Well, at that point in time, like a lot of other subjects prior to this, you almost feel you have to talk about it now. And I would say that there's a degree of the Sarah Fisher story, the female who made her debut for Vanderbilt last week, kicked football. I would say there's an element of this story now relevant enough to Georgia that we here on our program now have to talk about it, and I'll tell you why. First of all, Todd Fitch is the new interim Vanderbilt coach. He takes over for Derek Mason, who was fired on Sunday. And when Fitch met with reporters yesterday, one of the things that he acknowledged is that Vanderbilt is currently meeting the 53-player threshold for the game Saturday against Georgia, but the game, like a lot of recent Vanderbilt games, is probably going to be close. This is what Fitch had to say about that. Take a listen to this.
There's been a couple guys we talked to. I don't have any specifics right now on where we're at with all that. But there's discussions, that have been going on the last 24 hours or so with some of the players. So, later in this week, we'll have a better idea where we're at with all the numbers and where we're sitting at. But, it's an emotional time. And, when these things happen on a staff, there's a reaction right away, and so we were just trying to, teach patience, communicate with our guys. I told the staff, I told all the people in the building, just make sure we're communicating with our guys. And so I think it's starting to calm down now, and we'll have a better feel for where everything's at here as this week progresses.
All right, so that's Todd Fitch on the subject of the 53-player requirement. Vanderbilt apparently meeting that, but maybe just barely for right now. And obviously, on the heels of having Derek Mason fired, the concern here is with Vanderbilt kind of barely at the threshold as it is, that maybe they might actually fall below that if more players opt out. And Todd Fitch, when speaking with reporters here yesterday, did acknowledge that more players opting out is a potential possibility and may even be a reality for the Commodores. Here's more of Todd Fitch on that topic.
There's been a couple guys we talked to. I don't have any specifics right now on where we're at with all that. But there's discussions, that have been going on the last 24 hours or so with some of the players. So, later in this week, we'll have a better idea where we're at with all the numbers and where we're sitting at. But, it's an emotional time. And, when these things happen on a staff, there's a reaction right away, and so we were just trying to, teach patience, communicate with our guys. I told the staff, I told all the people in the building, just make sure we're communicating with our guys. And so I think it's starting to calm down now, and we'll have a better feel for where everything's at here as this week progresses.
Now, of course, we know that if Vanderbilt does have some opt-outs for Saturday, it is expected that Sarah Fisher, who kicked at least a kickoff last Saturday against Missouri, is expected to be back with the Commodores on Saturday. She was the only kicker listed on the depth chart that was released on Tuesday. And when Fitch met with reporters, he did acknowledge that she wants to be back playing, and the expectation is that she will be in Athens on Saturday and at least competing potentially for a chance to kick once again. Here's more of Todd Fitch on that subject.
She indicated that she wanted to continue, and she was there today. And right now, as this stands, and I don't see any change in that, she'll be with us on the trip to Georgia, and we're going to put the best people out there. And if she's our best option, we'll continue to work with her, and we'll do the best we can for the team.
Okay, so at this point, you sort of know, and probably even before the show began, kind of know everything that's gone on. Vanderbilt is relatively thin from a roster standpoint and has been even before Fitch became the interim coach. And obviously Sarah Fisher, very famous for having kicked last Saturday for the Commodores against Missouri. But here's where things get kind of interesting. There is a former player named Bruno Reagan. Reagan apparently started more than 40 games for Vanderbilt over the course of 4 years from 2014 through 2018. He was a captain, he has said, on some of those Commodore teams. And he went on a Nashville radio station yesterday to kind of describe what's going on inside the Vanderbilt locker room right now. Some of this related to some unrest due to the fact that Derek Mason is no longer head coach, but also some of this related to a former Vanderbilt kicker named Riley Gay, who you may not be aware of, is actually still a student at Vanderbilt. He's going to medical school. And apparently Gay wants to kick again, has been given maybe a chance to, kind of come back to the football team. But as Reagan said on Nashville radio yesterday, was told that he wouldn't get that opportunity. And apparently some players are not happy about that. This is what Bruno Reagan said. Take a listen.
So I've been talking with a bunch of journalists in the circle that Riley Gay is back, who was the kicker when I was there. He has some eligibility left, but he stopped playing. He was in med school. They brought him in, and he was kicking. And this is the story that I got. He was kicking well, and, obviously he kicked for a very long time, very experienced kicker, and he was kicking better than Sarah, obviously. He's been doing this a long time. And basically, they told him that, regardless if they get anything sorted out, the waivers, whatever, if he was able to play, he was told that he was going to be the backup on kickoff regardless behind Sarah. And I was told that some team captains very much didn't take that well at all. And that could be a reason for these opt-outs.
So as I said a moment ago, if Vanderbilt was playing any other team in the country this week, whether Sarah Fisher kicked or Riley Gay kicked, I really wouldn't care one way or another. But if the rejection of Gay, as described by Bruno Reagan, makes Vanderbilt players not want to play the game on Saturday, that affects Vanderbilt's ability to travel to Athens. Obviously, at that point in time, it is a lot more interesting to me, and I'm presuming a lot more interesting to a lot of other Georgia fans there as well. Now, as far as the Vanderbilt perspective on whether or not Riley Gay is a eligible kicker for this Saturday's game, could make it through the COVID protocols, Todd Fitch, the interim coach, did address that a little bit yesterday, but as Fitch says, according to his own words, he doesn't know much about Gay. This is Todd Fitch once again.
I don't know him. I wasn't here last year. I know he was a kicker here last year. There's been some discussion about him. He's in med school, I believe now. He's in med school, so there's a lot of steps would have to go through, in terms of eligibility and bringing him back. But just like anything, we're researching. If it's a possibility that we could get him back, we'll certainly take a look at him if he can make our team better. I know he kicked here before and everything. So as we progress through the week, I think we'll have a better clarification on that. But right now, until everything is cleared, paths are cleared with all the things that need to be done. We'll see how that plays out the rest of this week.
So I want to play one more audio clip for you on this topic to kind of give you an idea of the potential emotions involved. One of the things you probably heard was that Sarah Fisher gave a speech at halftime of the game Saturday against Missouri. Apparently, some Vanderbilt boosters, some current Vanderbilt players, weren't completely happy with the fact that this went down. Fairly or not, by the way, the feeling in the locker room, the feeling around the Vanderbilt community is this might not have been something that should have happened, and potentially also hangs as a cloud over whatever's going on with the Commodores right now, getting ready for Georgia on Saturday. Here's one more from Bruno Reagan on the Nashville radio station 104.5 The Zone, talking about that very subject. Let me let you hear Bruno Reagan again.
Believe me, I heard it as soon as anybody. As soon as the game was over, the text calls started rolling in. Like, bro, you're not going to believe what's happened. Alumni. The story breaks, and then alumni start hitting me up, and they're like, "No way, this happened." And that's just kind of where the program is right now. And I listen to Sarah. Everything that Sarah said publicly, I think she made some decent points in that speech. Was it her place as coming in, and she hadn't even kicked at that point yet. So, she hadn't even played. Was it her place? No. She saw something that she thought was, it was a dead locker room. They were getting whacked 21-0 at the time going into the half. But it's definitely in the norms of football, that's not a normal thing to happen. Obviously, this wasn't a normal situation,
So the overall bottom line for me is whether Sarah Fisher kicks or not for Vanderbilt is not really a topic that I'm all that interested in spending a lot of time about here on our program here today. I do care, though, what's going on behind the scenes with Vanderbilt because they're supposed to be in Athens on Saturday. It seems like this situation could have maybe been handled better, and maybe over the course of the next couple of days, whatever needs to happen can happen so Vandy can find enough players, show up in Athens on Saturday, and get the beat down they have coming. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, and we certainly appreciate your patience with me as I'm broadcasting here from home, enjoying the comfort of my home during the holiday season, and hopefully a lot of you are getting to do the same thing. And by the way, when you're kind of get tired of being at home, and eventually you will, holiday season or not, let me tell you about a great getaway that you can take advantage of. I'm talking about Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Whether it's either option, the original property, the Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, or Harrah's Cherokee Valley River, both these options, 2-hour drive for Atlanta, great getaway for you, unbelievable dining options, the gaming options, which have now kind of, social distancing is available there that kind of keeps you safe and comfortable and happy all the way around. That's what Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort is famous for, well known for, luxury shopping, world-class spa amenities. It's just a great place to to get a getaway. 2-hour drive from Atlanta. I know you're going to want to take advantage of that in the holiday season as we head towards the new year. And Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort obviously working really hard to keep you safe. And to get the best experience out of the entire process, become a member of Caesars Rewards. You can get all the great benefits that come from that. Great incentives as you stop by there and visit the property's website to go to find out more about it. It's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. You can check them out today. And of course, we appreciate Caesars, Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, making DawgNation Daily for you possible here today. All right, we're going to get Mike Griffith coming up in a moment. Let me speak to Michael Carvel, my producer here remotely today. We may have to reach out to Mike and get him on. He may not know to dial in on his own, but we'll do that. We'll get him up and running here, and we'll talk to him about what's going to happen for Georgia against Vanderbilt on Saturday, the need for Georgia to continue its improvement. I think Georgia's shown some offensive improvement over the course of the last couple of games against Mississippi State and then against South Carolina this past Saturday, needing to do that some more as you head towards this game against Vanderbilt on Saturday. We'll talk to Mike about exactly how that gets done. One of the other things I want to talk to Mike about is the ongoing athletic director search. And obviously, Greg McGarity has announced his retirement from Georgia. The search is ongoing to talk about his replacement. One of the names you've heard Mike mention on the pages of DawgNation.com is Josh Brooks. Brooks is going to meet with reporters today because while he is also a candidate for the full-time job, he steps in as the interim for right now, get a chance to maybe earn his way into that kind of full-time status. There are apparently other names will be considered. Carla Williams, the former UGA associate AD, who's now the athletic director at Virginia. So I'll talk to Mike a little bit about the process of selecting a new AD, and maybe more important than that, what Georgia needs from its next athletic director. And Michael Carvel, let's call an audible on the fly here. We're going to do some of this as a part of Around the Doghouse. Let's hold Around the Doghouse for later in the show, if you don't mind. And let me get Mike right now, because I know Mike wants to be a part of the conversation that's going to be going on with Josh Brooks here in just a little bit. So, Mike, why don't you hop in here and we'll bring you in on this. And I guess let me begin this way. What was your reaction to the news that Greg McGarity was choosing to step down as Georgia athletic director? And I guess in particular here, what do you think that means for Georgia to be in transition with the chief lead of the athletic department at the moment?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised, and really, Josh has carried a lot of duties really since last when COVID kicked in. I mean, that's why Greg stayed as long as he did. I think the plan was he was originally going to leave at the end of the fiscal year last spring, but when COVID happened, I was in Nashville. I spoke with him that night. I think that kind of rearranged the schedule, and whereas Greg was kind of overseeing things from 10,000 feet, I think Josh Brooks has actually been very heavy-handed and involved in a lot of operations, and therefore that's why he's the lead candidate, because of the stability that you mentioned. And if there were problems at the university, if there were issues, that would certainly trigger a look outside. But because Georgia has such great stability, they're in such a good position fiscally. Josh Brooks, a guy that gets along well with Kirby Smart, knows the real estate. I think that makes him a very strong internal candidate.
So let me speculate on something for a minute, and I'm not qualified to speculate on anything I'm about to say, but I still want you to comment on it nonetheless. So over the course of the last few years, it certainly seems like Georgia has raised a ton of money. And I would say there are three things that have made raising that money easy. We've had a strong economy, nationally speaking. For a while, it seemed like the tax law is advantageous for the kinds of donations that UGA donors have been making. Seems like some of those laws may have changed a bit now. And Kirby Smart was a new coach. They were winning right away. And there's always energy around newness, especially when there's early success. Well, now Kirby Smart's not quite as new anymore. Who knows what the economy is going to look like in years ahead? I won't even speculate on that at all. And I'm not qualified to speak about, what makes donating easier or not. But there is a way of looking at this that raising big capital in future years could be more difficult than it's been over the course of the last few years. What kind of challenge do you think awaits, whether it's Brooks or somebody else? What kind of a fundraising challenge do you think awaits the next athletic director? Because obviously Georgia's not immune to some of the things that other athletic departments are maybe dealing with, maybe maybe to a greater degree than Georgia, but certainly UGA not immune to that.
Yeah, I think the key there is how it's all relative, right? I mean, if the tax laws are rewritten where donations aren't as advantageous, if the economy doesn't do quite as well under the next president and under the next leadership style, that's all relative to the other SEC schools, and really that's what matters. I mean, let's be honest. If nobody had waterfalls in their locker rooms, then one school wouldn't have an advantage over another. But things did get quite posh. Football buildings with miniature golf courses and slides became in vogue and turned out to be effective in luring some of these young 17 and 18-year-old minds that aren't fully formed until they're 24. So what excited them, alternate uniforms and, trips to Italy, whatever different ideas, different coaches and programs had. The bottom line is that the McGill Society kicked in, and that's really been the key. It happened under Greg McGarity's leadership. Georgia's needed a better organization for their fundraising. I still don't think they get as much money from former athletes as a lot of other schools. I use Peyton Manning as a great example and how much financially he's done for the University of Tennessee versus, the rather paltry contributions Matt Stafford's made by comparisons when you look at the salaries of a Peyton Manning to a Matt Stafford.
Well, we got to put his business on Front Street, Mike.
Well, I mean, we're talking business and we're talking bottom dollar, and how do you take advantage of your alums and what does the donation base look like? And when you've got somebody that's made over $200 million and is a big face of the program, that's a very important relationship to have. And Matt Stafford's not the only one. There's a lot of high contract Georgia athletes, and how do they contribute versus how other athletes at schools contribute? But also, what does your relationship look like with them versus how well Tennessee's maintained relationships? And again, just comparing apples to apples here, right? So when we talk about donors, we talk about former athletes. There's a lot of different things that fall underneath, this category that we're discussing, fundraising. I think how national image and likeness laws are interpreted and how well schools do and handle the licensing for the recruits that they're trying to get. I think the branding of a student athlete. This is why I say it matters that the fifth string tailback got 14 carries and the 5-star receiver gets 4 catches. Guess what? That's not going to help George Pickens, get the paper towel in national image and likeness deal. Is the guy that cleans up in the fourth quarter, right? So there's a lot of things at work here with the new athletic director, a lot of challenges that are ahead for George as it relates to being able to compete with other SEC schools.
So let me do one more thing on this topic, and then I want to talk about Georgia Vanderbilt on the field on Saturday. I asked Connor Raleigh this yesterday, and I honestly don't know the answer to this. I'm curious what you're going to say. By definition, a priority means a hierarchy. You rank one thing above something else. As an athletic director, how much of this is a decision where you have to prioritize football over everything else, and you can't make too many decisions that prioritize other sports because it might negatively impact football? And how much of this is that a good athletic director can create a scenario where Georgia is equally good at all sports and, dominates kind of across the board? In other words, pie chart wise, how much of the athletic director's time needs to be making sure that Kirby Smart's got everything that he wants, and how much of this is making sure that baseball keeps up with the arms race in the SEC, that basketball is performing as well as it could? How much of this is football versus how much of this is other sports?
Well, I mean, it's been said best that football is the engine that drives the revenue train. So you got to take care of football because the money that you generate from football is what enables you to be competitive in other sports. Because it is such a revenue generator. Basketball is very small. Even at the most successful schools, it's still a very small part of the budget. Obviously, very, very small at Georgia. Paltry donations in that area. Even with record attendance, they're still not breaking the bank and making any money. Basketball supports itself pretty much. You'd like to see women's basketball do that. Georgia's had some, has not been good in a while in women's basketball. That's really fallen off quite a bit. Softball, they don't charge attendance. They could. Other places they do. There's a wealth of talent in softball. It's one of the more underachieving sports at Georgia right now. Gymnastics had its thing going. I think that's strong. I think there's a tradition there. Equestrian, you can get into track and field. Track and field has a national program in some of the worst facilities relative to the success. I mean, that's been largely ignored, very poor. Tennis has a tradition, may have outgrown that. You don't have the indoor facility to host the NCAAs anymore. That's just the rules changed on you. But back to your question, BA, whoever is the AD absolutely has to have a great working relationship with Kirby Smart. And it's not just giving him everything he wants, it's giving him everything that he needs. And I don't think Kirby's a guy that wants more than he needs, although Georgia did spend more than any other program in the nation in recruiting, and yet we're watching him giving up 571 yards and 564 yards on defense. So Kirby's got some things to take care of on his staff also.
We got some limited time with you today because I know you got a lot of stuff to cover here related to the AD search, but I do want to talk about Georgia Vanderbilt on the field. You and I worked together on our post-game show this past Saturday. A little bit of a difference of opinion there. I'm actually pretty speaking as a fan here for a moment, pretty happy with what I've seen from Georgia the last couple of weeks. This is not a perfect team by a long stretch, but I believe offensively, after the last 2 weeks, it shows that I think it's getting better. And obviously, JT Daniels as a starter is a big part of that. I think Todd Monken coming into his own here as a coordinator is also a part of that there as well. And I'm really eager to see if that continues against Vanderbilt on Saturday. Even though Georgia's a 35-point favorite, there's still some things I think that it can show. What are you looking to see from Georgia against the Commodores this upcoming weekend?
Well, I mean, let's just be honest. They're getting better. The competition's also getting worse. I mean, that has a lot to do with it. They didn't choose this schedule. They didn't choose to play these horrible teams, unattractive television games. That was the SEC that stuck Georgia with these stinker games the last month of the season, which pretty much tells you they didn't expect Georgia to be in the SEC championship game.
Now, it's funny. I don't want to get lost in this, but I actually think that they thought they were doing Georgia a favor at the time. They did the same thing for the most part with Alabama. They thought Arkansas was going to be bad, so therefore you give them an easy, final week to get ready for the SEC championship game. I think the SEC, by giving Georgia what was supposed to be Vanderbilt at the end of the regular season, at the time, I think they thought they were doing Georgia a favor.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you could argue that a lot of different ways. I think Tennessee and Florida was made to be a CBS game, and if both those teams are out of it, it certainly wouldn't get the ratings that it's going to get this weekend. That's probably another topic for another show. But to your point, I do agree that Todd Monken is a great offensive coordinator. What I'd like to see is Kirby Smart show how the mentality is going to change. Someone said, you had your explosive game, Mike. You had your 28 for 38, 401 yards. I said, you know what that is in Florida? That's another day at the office. You know what that is for Trevor Lawrence? That's a routine performance. You know what that is at Alabama? That's just the way they do business. We shouldn't be getting excited and acting like 28 of 38 for 401 yards is crazy numbers when you have a 5-star quarterback and you have 5-star receivers and talents like George Pickens and Jermaine Burton, young people like Darnell Washington that need grooming, Arian Smith, another guy that Kirby himself said, this guy needs experience. Okay, coach, well, throw to him in the fourth quarter then. Use these valuable game reps. I want to see some signs that Georgia football truly is going to move toward the more explosive, more offensive model that Kirby Smart discussed and that we believe he hired Todd Monken to orchestrate.
We're going to put a pin in this conversation for right now because I know you're busy, but we'll be talking more about this on video throughout the week. And obviously, we'll be reading your opinion on this at DawgNation.com as well. Mike, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort today. And I'll look forward to getting a chance to speak to you really soon.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a great one, man. Appreciate it.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. And to just give you a heads up, Mike got a lot of coverage today of the Georgia Athletic Director search. Most of the time, this doesn't coincide with what's happening here on our program today. It kind of did. So we need to let Mike run off and do that for right now. But we'll talk, certainly more about this in the days to come. And listen, there's nothing I'm going to say to you in response to what Mike said that I haven't already said, to him directly. I think one of the mistakes that Mike is making is assuming that simply on the basis of a performance against Mississippi State, that now means that the Georgia offense has turned a corner and therefore it's now ready to throw and keep pace with what teams like Alabama are doing, what the very best teams in college football are doing. I don't think that's quite the case yet. I think it's an ongoing process. Unfortunately, the gap between Georgia and what I think of as the very best offense in the SEC right now in Alabama is still pretty significant. Now, that can be true on the one hand, but on the other hand, you can also have a scenario where Georgia's working to close that gap. And I think that's what you see going on right now, that when you do throw the ball against Mississippi State, those are the kinds of things that Georgia hasn't done. You can't compare, Georgia to Alabama, Georgia to Florida. What is it the self-help guys always say? You can't compare yourself to other people. You got to compare yourself to the old version of yourself or something along those lines. I think that is kind of true for, college football as well. To continually gnash teeth about the difference between Georgia and Alabama offensively at the moment, or even for this year, Georgia and Florida, is probably a waste of time. But is Georgia better offensively now than it was at the beginning of this year or for large stretches of the 2019 season? That's a pretty relevant question. And I think when you see the way that Georgia has performed the last couple of weeks, I think the answer to that question, I think you could say is yes. And the one thing that Mike points out that is true. Well, this is opponent dependent. Georgia's been playing as a 26-point favorite against Mississippi State. Was 21.5-point favorite against South Carolina, 35.5-point favorite against Vanderbilt. That's all true as well. You can only play the schedule that you're forced to play. And I do think in these blowout games, you can still learn something. The fact that Georgia is now good enough to take what's supposed to be a blowout game and make it an actual blowout is a sign of improvement. Against Mississippi State, Georgia wasn't capable of doing that. On the road against South Carolina last week, they were. This is a Vanderbilt team that comes in Saturday expected to lose by 5 touchdowns. Can Georgia actually meet those expectations? Dogs the last couple of seasons really haven't always done that. Closer than it was supposed to be last year against Texas A&M by virtue of the point spread. Closer than it was supposed to be last season against Kentucky by virtue of the point spread, even though rain was obviously a factor. Georgia's a 3-touchdown favorite against South Carolina last season and lost the game. So, Georgia beating up on weak SEC opponents in 2017, 2018, that was Georgia's calling card. That was the program hallmark. They went 2 years without losing, or I should say, not only did they go 2 years without losing a game in the SEC East, they went 2 years winning each of those games by 2 touchdowns or more. They were winning games comfortably. But somewhere in the midst of the 2019 season, that for Georgia kind of changed. We have cataloged all the reasons why, and different people, sort of viewed differently what the ultimate reason was. But Georgia stubbed its toe continually offensively a year ago, and we knew there was going to be hard work in place for Georgia to rebuild that here during the season. And that's before coronavirus. That's before G-Day got taken away. That's before spring practice got taken away. That's before this team spent a summer wondering if it was going to get to play football or not. We already knew there was a major offensive overhaul that was needed, a rebuild job that had to take place. And we said before the season began that we would not accept excuses for Georgia in trying to get that done. But even if you reject excuses, you at least have to acknowledge the reality that this was not going to be an automatic, instantaneous transformation. And now at this point in the season, Georgia's starting to show some signs that it's capable of getting some of this kind of stuff done. I'm very curious to see where the offense goes from here, and assuming that Vanderbilt can scrape together enough players to show up in Athens on Saturday, even if it's a blowout game against an opponent that's not expected to be very competitive, I think there'll still be some things that we can learn about Georgia there in that one. So it's DawgNation Daily. It's presented today by our friends at Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. I'm glad to have you with us at home today. So that means the vibe around the show is a little bit different, but we're going to move on to our SEC through here. And as I said before, we push pause on Around the Doghouse a little earlier, but when I'm done with the SEC through, I do want to get back into the athletic director search here a little bit. I'm actually more interested in kind of one aspect of the job that will be done by the next athletic director, more so than I'm interested in who the AD is. Mike's made a pretty compelling case for Josh Brooks. I'm fine with that. I would, if Josh Brooks was named AD tomorrow, I'd be fine. I'd be happy with that. I don't know that I have a strong feeling about who should get the job, but I think I do have an opinion about how that job should be done here going forward. And we'll talk more about that coming up in a moment. Before we get to that, I do want to hit on a couple of the big stories around the SEC and college football here for a moment. College football playoff rankings came out last night. Georgia was number 8 in those rankings. And I was thinking about this, and this topic never really got off the ground. And I guess I didn't give too much credence to it when it was being discussed. But what if it had come to pass that with Georgia at number 8, there had been some talk, by media types, things like that at the beginning of the season of, given the weirdness of this year, given the difficulty of making good comparisons between teams, when you don't have one of the most important data points you typically use for that, which is non-conference games, maybe we should expand the playoff. Maybe we should have a 6 or an 18 playoff this year as a one-year only thing, just to satisfy what is otherwise a very difficult decision for the committee. Now, this was, I think, always a non-starter, but it was certainly something that was discussed by a lot of media types. And if that were in place right now, how much more interesting would these rankings be for Georgia, who obviously lost out on its chance to really be a playoff contender when it lost to Florida, when it lost to Alabama. But if there was an 18 playoff, who knows? And Georgia now, with JT Daniels as the established starting quarterback, who's to say that Georgia also couldn't be more competitive in some of those games against better teams now that you feel like you've got a quarterback that, at least to the eye, looks a lot like what some of the other top teams in the country kind of have. So I guess we'll kind of always wonder what might could have been on that. But the Dogs did come in at number 8. As far as the rest of the rankings go, Bama was, of course, first. Notre Dame was 2. I'm a little bit of a fighting Irish hater, but I don't have much of a beef with the Irish right now. Going on the road, winning comfortably at North Carolina, they're doing their job at the moment in a year in which it's hard to really validate anyone beyond, let's say, the Crimson Tide as a clear playoff team. Notre Dame is doing about as much as anybody can to make their own case here. And even someone like me, who typically looks for reasons to bash Notre Dame, even I'll have to give them a little bit of credit for that. Clemson is at 3, Ohio State's at 4. Laughable to me that Ohio State maintains its number 4 status, even though it's only played 4 games. I don't blame the Buckeyes for that. I blame the Big Ten. I think they've had a ridiculous approach to this entire thing. And I think it's a shame that a good team like Ohio State is not getting the proving ground they deserve to determine if they're one of the 4 best teams or not. If they'd played a full schedule, I would have no problem kind of rubber stamping them as a playoff team and letting them move right along. But they're not playing games right now. And if you're going to have a season, the games that are played have to matter. Right now, Ohio State doesn't have enough of those. I don't see how you talk about them as a true, legitimate playoff team at the moment. You get SEC teams after that at 5 and 6 with A&M and then Florida. I think there's a very realistic scenario where, it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to say the college football playoff could potentially be 2 SEC, 2 ACC teams. And at this point in time, I'm not quite so sure that Notre Dame, Clemson, Alabama, and Florida aren't the 4 best teams in the country, although I'm certainly someone who would not want Florida in the college football playoff if you could help it. Georgia, as I said, is at 8. Cincinnati, we'll do more on this later on, is a common bowl opponent for the Dogs. So the Bearcats is the highest rated group of 5 team, are 1 spot there ahead of Georgia on that topic. So last night, there was also some drama on the selection show when Kirk Herbstreit, the ESPN analyst, who folks know as Ohio State graduate, but I don't even know, how much that even factors into this discussion, kind of shot from the hip at a certain moment, saying that he thought that Michigan didn't want to play Ohio State, would opt out of the rest of the season. Now, this is the kind of thing that fans talk about all the time. It is commonly discussed amongst fans of who wants to play and who does and who may be looking to get out of a game. And it's the kind of thing that I'm sure off the cameras and behind the scenes, ESPN people kind of, shooting from the hip, off the cuff, are saying all the time. It's probably not the kind of thing you should say on TV because you have no way of proving that, no way of backing that up, even though there have been some reports that Michigan was at least considering not playing any more football this season. Herbstreit got vilified for that. The national media types, got up on their soapboxes about this. And then Herbstreit later had to give a video to apologize. What is the line in politics that, the biggest, I think is the Kinsley rule, that the biggest scandal you could have is something along the lines of accidentally telling the truth. Maybe that's what Herbstreit did here. I'm not really sure, but one way or another, it's Kinsley gaffe, I think is what it's called when you accidentally tell the truth. Maybe this was a Kinsley gaffe of sorts for Kirk Herbstreit. But people in kind of the corridors of power of elite college football media were not happy with Herbstreit for insinuating that Michigan might not want to play the Ohio State Buckeyes a little bit later on this season. Do you remember back in the spring when all the talk was related to the great recruiting success of Tennessee? And for the most part, we kind of tried to, with facts and logic, explain why this was kind of a short-term spring story and not a long-term story, even though I will tell you that Jeremy Pruitt's recruiting better at Tennessee than has been going on, prior to his arrival. The idea that this was going to be, I think they're ranked number one at the time, even a top 5, top 10 type class for Tennessee was probably still a little bit of a stretch. The big get for Tennessee back during that spring period when they got so much attention was Terrence Lewis. Well, Lewis is now decommitted from the program. So almost all of the recruiting excitement that was generated back in the spring for Tennessee, you're hard pressed to find any remnants or evidence of that really whatsoever. Still a couple of guys left over, but a lot of the guys that were discussed, Kamar Wilcoxon, Terrence Lewis, they're just gone. There are other places. Wilcoxon things already enrolled in Florida, so a lot of that has kind of disappeared. Coaching search is still ongoing. You're going to hear a little bit more about rumors connecting Urban Meyer potentially to Texas. That's probably worth following. I thought it was interesting that Bob Stoops was back working as a short-term assistant at Oklahoma. Obviously, kind of some of that is going to just generate all kinds of chatter about a number of things because Stoops is always one of these, pie in the sky type rumors for any other coaching job that might be open. There's also some thought that Shane Beamer, and this seems to be a growing thought, that Shane Beamer could be the next South Carolina coach. Obviously, Neil Brown, the West Virginia coach, said he was not a candidate for the South Carolina job yesterday. We'll see what happens with Florida and Tennessee on the field on Saturday to see if more heats up around Jeremy Pruitt and his status as a potential hot seat coach. So, I always love coaching rumors around here. This could be a year we get a little more juicier ones than other times. So that could be that could be a lot of fun, and we will certainly we'll certainly follow all of that as it goes on here, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, I do want to turn our attention back to the topic that I was going to try to address before Mike Griffith joined us, but Mike was kind of pressed for time today, so we moved him up. I'll move this back. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. A shocking breach of protocol to do the Around the Doghouse segment so late in the show, but I did want to mention this related to the athletic director search. I think here's the thing that is the biggest challenge awaiting the next athletic director, whoever it might be. And I'm sure that Greg McGarity dealt with some of this kind of stuff too. There's the thing that we notice about athletic directors, and that's how they choose to spend money around a program. What buildings do they green light? How much money are they willing to spend to buy out coaches who need to be fired or reward coaches who've done a good job and you want to keep employed? We give the most attention to what athletic directors do to exit money from an account, how they choose to spend the money that's in the coffers. But that's not the most important part of the athletic director's job. The most important part of the athletic director's job is actually the flow of money that comes into the program. Making sure that you've got a very healthy donor base, that there is huge infusions of cash by the people who can afford to do that for you. And here's, I think, kind of a dirty little secret when it comes to raising money, the level that a place like UGA has to do it. And this is somewhat counterintuitive. It's probably easier to get one person to give $1 million than it is to get 10 people to give $100,000. And it's probably easier to get one person to give $100,000 than it is to get 4 people to give $25,000. And if you're looking to raise money in the most efficient manner possible, seeking out and then keeping happy the richest, most willing big dollar donors is probably the most efficient way to do that. But the byproduct of that is, and many of you are aware of this, is that as you do that, you can easily kind of conjure the image that all you're really interested in is taking care of your big donors, and you're no longer as interested in rank and file fans. That rank and file fans who can only afford to make the minimum donation, only enough to secure their tickets, and don't really wield much power, that ultimately you don't care as much about them because you're only interested in the $1 million guys and gals, the kinds of people who sit up in the skyboxes and things like that. And the dirty little secret is that if you want the most money possible, making the richest people the happiest is the most efficient way to do that. But obviously for the next athletic director of Georgia, you got to find a way to do that without making rank and file fans think you're not in it for them. And one of the reasons why Josh Brooks has seemingly gotten some attention for this job is that, at least to my eyes, the thing that it does appear to be true is that he's kind of good at understanding what rank and file fans kind of want. For instance, I think Sanford Stadium just looks nicer than it used to. If you're walking in the corridors, they've kind of hung these like banners over what used to be chain link fencing that's kind of a retro, run Lindsey run, some of the great moments in Georgia history, kind of presented in very nice retro style. My understanding is that Josh Brooks was instrumental in getting that done. That's kind of a small fan-friendly step that I think the average fan probably kind of likes, those that are lucky enough to be inside Sanford Stadium. Same thing for, I guess he's been given some credit for the Georgia Notre Dame series. That's the kind of thing that it wasn't just rich people who went to South Bend to watch Georgia and Notre Dame. Average regular fans saved up money and did some of that kind of stuff too. They were that excited about having such an unusual non-conference game. So whether it is Josh Brooks or not, who's the next Georgia athletic director, frankly, I don't really have an opinion on who the job should be or who should have the job. I just have an opinion on how the job should be done. You've got to get rich people to spend big and donate huge, while also making regular fans think that you're also in it for them. It's not an easy needle to thread, but the next AD needs to make sure to be able to do that. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Thanks for tolerating me being at home here for a couple of days. I'm certainly looking forward to being back in the friendly confines of our DawgNation World Headquarters studios really soon. I also, on the way out the door, want to invite you to check out what I thought was a really good piece with our buddy Connor Riley from DawgNation.com, looking at the current bowl situation as it relates to Georgia. As I said before, the most common projection that's out there is Georgia and Cincinnati and the Peach Bowl. And there are reasons why the Peach Bowl would obviously love Georgia if it's able to get that. So make sure that you check that out from Connor Riley. And I think you'll be glad that you did. There are other scenarios potentially at play for Georgia besides the Peach Bowl, and we'll let him tell you about that. Read that at DawgNation.com. We did our Around the Doghouse a little earlier. I also remind you that's brought to you by friends at Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza. It's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. Find out on the Marco's app or Marcos.com, and you can enjoy some of that for yourself, baked in a 450-degree oven, contactless, touchless, delivered to you right after that. It's also great pizza, great savings. Marco's app, Marcos.com. You can find out more about Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you back here again tomorrow. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Appreciate all of you being with us here today. Sorry for a little shorter with Mike Griffith, but he had to run and do some things. And so we want to be as accommodating as possible as we can for the folks who join our show on a regular basis for the regular day job they have to do. So we'll let him do that. I'll take some of your comments here right now, both Facebook and YouTube. Remind you to check out rsandrews.com for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. It's really cold today. So a lot of you wondering, is my heating system going to keep me and my family warm, especially if you're like me? My wife and kids are upstairs right now, and they are cold natured. They want the heat on. So they want to make sure that heat's toasty and warm for them. And if you're worried that yours might not be toasty and warm enough for your own cold natured family, well, check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. They'll give you a lot more peace of mind on that. They'll get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. All right, let me start on, I think, Facebook today. I think I did YouTube first yesterday. So I'll start on Facebook first today. We'll roll through some comments. Probably not go real long today because we do have a pretty busy day around here on the DawgNation front. We'll try to get as many comments as we can and get rocking and rolling after that. Phil Rogers says, any commits coming in the next week? Yeah, I would definitely think that the next 7 days could be fruitful for Georgia in that regard. So I'd watch very, very closely on that front. Very, very, very close on that front. Epic Robinson, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Keith Fold says, I've been a regular, I talked about regular fans a moment ago. He says, I've been a regular fan for 50 years, and I saw this year that money trumps loyalty. So Keith is exactly the kind of person that I'm talking about when I said what I said a moment ago, that Georgia's got to find a way to make that not seem true. I'll give you kind of a corny analogy. How many have ever been to Disney World before? You know, Disney World's a corporation probably like any other. It wants to maximize as many profits as it can, just candidly speaking. But they do enough like Disney magic type stuff to make people think that's not true. And I'm not being cynical. I'm saying this as a compliment, that they're obviously a business, and a huge one. They want to make as much money as they can. They want to avoid losing money, but they create a facade, kind of a Disney magic type thing, that makes people not think about that part of the business. There are other businesses that are really good at this too. I won't rattle through as many of them because it starts to feel like a free plug, but Georgia finding some way to create a Disney magic vibe, I think it's probably pretty important, that you have to have millionaires who are happy. You've got to have that. It's just the easiest way to, anytime you're trying to raise a large sum of money for sports, for anything, getting a big sum from a wealthy person is the easiest way to do this, the most efficient way to do that. You're not going to make huge money a few dollars at a time. You're just not going to. So you've got to, behind the scenes, go after the big wigs and make them happy. But out front, you got to try to find a way to make people like Keith, who's nice enough to give us a candid comment here, you got to do something to make those guys and gals feel like they're wanted and feel like they're happy. Because while you may not be able to make as much money off the regular fans, a whole bunch of unhappy regular fans causes a different kind of problem. And obviously that's some of what awaits the next the next Georgia athletic director. I do believe there are some longtime season ticket holders who are a little bit upset for a number of reasons this year as you head towards 2021, and doing something to address that's probably going to be important. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says, I will change my tune and expand to an 18 playoff if 5 and Ohio State team gets in. That's just poppycock. And I, for the most part, kind of agree with Matt on this. The honest truth is I think there's a very good chance that Ohio State is one of the 4 best teams in the country. At the start of a normal year, I would have probably just assumed they would have easily demonstrated themselves to be one of the 4 best teams in the country. But even if I think that's probably true based on what I see on paper, you've still got to validate that by beating some teams. Take the comparison between Texas A&M and a moment. On a neutral field, I believe that Ohio State probably beats Texas A&M. But Texas A&M is going to play something close to a full schedule, and if it goes 9-1, it beat Florida, number 6 team in the country. If it does that, how could you possibly say that Ohio State, on the basis of a very small sample size of games, is more deserving of the playoff than what Texas A&M would be? I think it would be a total sham. And I'm not saying this as some sort of Buckeyes hater. I'm really not. I'm just saying that you really invalidate so much of what you've tried to create as a sport if you pretend that the games played on the field or the lack of games on the field don't matter. And listen, the people who never wanted there to be a season to take place, the people who actively work to prevent a season from occurring, they'll use all of this as fodder to say, well, this just goes to show you how big of a sham the season is. I don't think that's true. I think it goes to show you how big of a sham the Big Ten's approach to the season was. But you can't say this is a college football story overall. The Big Ten's problem was it listened to way too many of the naysayers at the very beginning, as opposed to what the SEC and the ACC were doing, which was creating a plan that has worked. And the ACC and the SEC have each at least 2 playoff-worthy teams. You can make a case the SEC may have 3. The idea that those 2 leagues, and I'm going to include the ACC in this for a moment because they expanded to add Notre Dame. Notre Dame's played well in the field. I cannot say a bad word about the Irish, even though I would love to be able to do so. Can't do it. I think to punish the ACC and the SEC for what they've been able to get done this season, and to reward an Ohio State team that may be good but has not been able to play games because it's been handcuffed by the ineptitude of its own league leadership. I just don't know how you could do that. I don't know how you could. I'm right there with you on that. Connor Graham says our team right now looks similar to the LSU the season before they won it all. So obviously some excitement and optimism's returning here to Georgia football. I would say to Connor and everybody else, my hope is that Georgia can finish this season on a strong note to kind of prove some of that kind of stuff. To make the comparison for LSU here for a moment, this is where it could get very interesting. I don't really want to see Georgia play Cincinnati in a bowl, but Cincinnati is a pretty good team. Remember, the end of the 2018 season was LSU against UCF. Was it the Fiesta Bowl, I believe? I think it was the Fiesta Bowl they played in that year. I may have the bowl wrong, but it was LSU playing UCF. LSU got that win. That's not the kind of sexy opponent that a team like LSU wants to play. Fans of LSU want to play. But some of what LSU in 2019 did was probably proven a little bit by the fact that they circled the wagons, got a victory against UCF, and a game that really mattered for the Golden Knights. Sometimes bowl wins can be false positives, but we know that UCF was out there playing its hardest, and LSU went out there and found a way to win the game anyway. So maybe from that standpoint, maybe there is a comparison that works. I'm going to do a couple more on Facebook, then I'll go to YouTube. Daryl Christian pointing out something that's been pointed out to me as well, that 3 years ago today was the SEC championship. Hard to believe Georgia's win against Auburn, a game that I still have very fond memories of. Randy Hall, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Philip Jordan Wells and Hugh Nash talking about Eddie. Yeah, Eddie's coming back. He's on vacation right now, but Eddie's in a few days. I'm going to tell you a lot more about this in the time to come. I'm kind of getting a lot of the details ready, but Eddie's going to make a big triumphant return. We're going to introduce a brand new Gator Hater segment. We're going to be doing that here coming up very, very soon. All right, let me go over to YouTube here for a little bit. I'll come back to Facebook before we're done on today's program. Scott Harris says, if we aren't in the playoffs, does it matter who we play? Scott, it matters to me because I do want to see Georgia play the best team it can play. And I just want to see Georgia get another data point for the season, another chance to improve or another chance to show how good it could have been. Cincinnati's not a very exciting opponent, but they are probably pretty good. And so, a chance for Georgia to show up, play well in that game, get a win, that probably would matter to me, even though this year is going to be probably have any kind of bowl festivities removed from the scenario. That would probably matter. Jason Bowen, I really appreciate the kind words. Thank you, Jason. It's very nice of you to say. Bubby Dean says I should give Mike guidance on proper lighting for Zoom calls. Yeah, Mike had the light behind him today, which always makes you look darker. My lighting in my home is better now than it used to be because I'm using a lot more lights. I basically brought a whole light kit home, and so I'm kind of cheating to get the lighting effect that I'm getting right now. When I'm living in a normal non-Zoom situation, it's not like I live in a dungeon. My house is not what I would think of as dark, but it always shows up as dark on the screen. So I had to bring in a lot more light. In fact, I've got another light over here. Let's see if I can, I didn't have this on a little earlier. I can't find the button to turn it on. Bubby Dean also likes Luke Fickell as a coach. Yeah, for a lot of these Big Ten openings that might come available, let's say Michigan, if it were to become available, I think Fickell's a big name on a lot of those boards for sure. Jamie Oldman says you're just advocating diminishing the value of the regular season for more playoff blowouts. Well, I don't know that I'm advocating for anything. Maybe Jamie's talking to somebody different. Good to see our buddy Bob Zamblin back in the comment section. Bob's a great guy. And I agree with this point. He says it's important to get more game time snaps to the younger guys of the next few to end the season. I think Bob's right about that. Roger Swain getting impatient to see Georgia win the championship, and hopefully Georgia will be able to satisfy that need here in the next couple of years. Jacob Thompson says, yeah, the giant clock is still behind me. And he talked about the band shirt. A lot of you don't remember this, but a couple of years ago, I think it's been a couple of years now, I wore the sweatshirt that had like the horizontal stripe on it. I didn't even know what this was. But I just got roasted. Now I get roasted in the comment section fairly fairly frequently anyway. But this was like an unmerciful beating I took in the comment section because of the shirt that I was wearing. What was funny is I actually don't even know where that is. I mean, listen, I hid that thing in the bottom of the closet after you guys, ripped me to death. Maybe I'll find it and wear that thing tomorrow. But you guys ripped me bad for wearing that. So I'm no fool. I'm never wearing that thing again. But I was like flipping through the closet the other day looking for something to wear because it was cold. I was trying to find some sort of sweatshirt to put on. And I grabbed a sweatshirt at first that I thought was, as Jacob calls it, the band shirt. Like, looks like a red coat uniform, he said. It wasn't it, but it's funny that you bring this up today because I was just thinking about this sweatshirt the other day because I thought I found it and I didn't. Green Soldier says, who do you think stays from our defense, or are we losing 4 this year? Hope we can hold on to some of the players. Yeah, I think one of the problems for like knowing this right now is a lot of these mock drafts are notoriously incorrect early on because they kind of rely more on media reports and actual scouting and analysis. But obviously, you look at all the guys for instance, among the cornerbacks, are going to have their chance to go between the Campbells and Stokes and the guys like that, possibly even DJ Daniel too, if he's healthy. Some of those guys are going to get pretty high draft grades. For instance, Albert Breer reported before the season that Daniel had kind of already gotten like a second or a third round type grade. So, it has not been a great year necessarily for the Georgia secondary, but some of those guys, because of the athletic profile they bring to the table, are going to have a chance to be high draft picks. So I'd say that it's too early to know how many of those guys that you lose, but you should presume that you lose at least somebody from that spot. And, you can decide who's the most likely guy to be that. If Jordan Davis is truly a candidate to be drafted where I've seen him projected, among the top couple of defensive tackles taken, it seems hard to imagine he comes back to Georgia, and it seems hard to imagine you could advise him to do so. Now, Davis is probably my favorite player on the team, so, I don't want him to go. But if he's, near the top of the defensive tackle pecking order, be tough to even say that he should stay, given that's the case. If you're, first, second, third round pick as a defensive tackle, you should, probably, strongly consider going back. It's certainly a first or second round type situation. So yeah, I mean, I would say that you're still, looking at some of that kind of stuff. When you look at the totality of seniors who could leave or juniors who could leave and, could stay, I'm expecting at least a pretty big surprise by someone who chooses to stay, and maybe a pretty big surprise in terms of someone who chooses to leave. But it's going to be probably the busiest offseason we've had in terms of covering all of this because there are a lot more decisions to be made than ever before. Green Soldier says Davis and Stokes, I can see. Yeah, Stokes has certainly gotten a lot of love in a lot of these mock drafts, but he's also played better on the field, at least in the mind of a lot of people, than, say, Tyson Campbell. Whereas I think the evaluation that's made of Campbell is going to be more about, what he might show in a combine setting or something like that. For instance, Stokes' stats are better. He's gotten pick sixes, things like that. Campbell just got his first interception last week. And so therefore, mock drafts have a tendency to favor a guy like Stokes because he's involved in the action so much. But the actual scouting process of the NFL, I don't think gives a ton of consideration to the lack of interceptions for Campbell. I think they look at him a little deeper than that. And so right now, the perception is that Stokes might be ahead of Campbell. Let's see if when the heavier scouting process occurs, if that really is the case. Bubby Dean says, do we play a makeup game against Missouri on 12-19? So the SEC is going to announce this on Sunday, I think. And I would say that the more likely date for Georgia, Missouri is probably the 12th. If the attempt is going to be made to get 10 games in for everybody, then Missouri would probably play Mississippi State on December 19th, would probably play Georgia on the 12th. Now, Florida can clinch the SEC East with a win on Saturday. So at that point in time, you'll know more about the situation with, is Georgia even still mathematically alive? But I'm thinking they might want to put Georgia, Missouri on the 12th, although the option would be available for them not to, and then play it on the 19th. But we're going to find out on Sunday what that's going to be. And I believe the SEC is working to get all 10 of these games in, which, by the way, I guess I maybe should have mentioned this during the regular show, but the ACC announced yesterday that it's giving the week off before the championship game to both Notre Dame and Clemson, which essentially clinches the spot in the ACC title game for Notre Dame. Clemson's still got to at least technically win again to be in that game. There had been some talk among media, well, maybe the SEC now needs to respond by giving Florida and Alabama the week off before the game. And maybe that's what they will do. Maybe they'll move these schedules around a little bit more to make that happen. But I think the SEC still wants to get its 10 games in. I think it wants to be able to demonstrate just how much of a success it was capable of producing. And I understand the reason to do that. So long answer to a short question. I think it's still more likely that Georgia and Missouri is played on December 12th, but there is a silly possibility, I guess, it could be December 19th. And I could have given you the wrong date. Instead of announcing this on Sunday, maybe it's Friday, they're going to make this announcement. So I may have said that wrong. Let me go back over to Facebook just for a minute. We'll get ready to go after that. Chase Barbie says this year definitely exposed conference coaches and players and who's about the sport and the fans. Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing some wildly different outcomes this year and approaches to an unprecedented challenge. And, there's kind of only one way this stuff gets covered. For instance, everybody in the media was seemingly mad at Dabo Swinney the other day when he was continuously calling out Florida State. But then, Bronco Mendenhall, who's not typically thought of as a shoot from the hip type coach, the Virginia coach, he also seemingly called out Florida State, saying they have no interest in going back to Tallahassee, trying to play a game after the Seminoles canceled another game on game day this past Saturday. I think that institutional failings are a real thing. Sometimes those institutional failings happen at the conference level. Sometimes it happens at the program level. But while the virus is an unprecedented issue, the readiness to handle unprecedented issues is just not doled out in equal measure. Some conferences are better. The SEC, I'd say, one. Some conferences are worse. The Big Ten, Pac-12, obviously an example of the latter. And, some institutions, at the program level, the coronavirus has only kind of pointed out some of the other failings that are currently going on behind closed doors. A school like Florida State's certainly an example of that. Maybe Michigan is too. Keith Fold says he thinks it is Sunday. Yeah, I thought it was Sunday too, Keith. But then I started second guessing myself in my head to maybe say, well, maybe it's Friday. And by the way, the difference between Friday and Sunday would matter because if Florida beats Tennessee, then Florida would clinch the SEC East. And so therefore, you could conceivably play Georgia, Missouri on the 19th without, messing up any kind of weird technicality. I don't believe Georgia's going to win the division because I don't think Florida's going to lose probably. But at least opening up the possibility that Florida would have to win its scheduled games to truly qualify for the SEC championship would at least be maintaining some sense of competitive integrity to the extent that it even still matters anymore in life. John William Adams wants more for Darnell Washington, comparing him to, is it Pegasus? Is that how you say the name of the big tight end at Auburn? We'll certainly see how this continues. I mean, there's obviously a lot of excitement around Washington because he was a five-star tight end. But as we've said before, a little bit different kind of scenario than someone like a Rick Gilbert, who was a much bigger part, I believe, of the Marietta offense and probably a little bit more of a polished pass-catching weapon. That's not to say that I don't think Darnell Washington can be big part of the Georgia offense. And he's on the field a bunch right now. Georgia, in their two tight end sets, almost always includes Washington as one of those two tight ends, or at least very frequently does. But I've always felt like his development as a real pass catching option was going to be more than just a one-year story. So I really don't think that Darnell Washington is behind schedule with his development. I understand the eagerness to see him be more of a part of this passing game, but I don't know that Washington's catching a lot of balls for any of the top SEC offenses right now. But before his career is done, I expect him to catch plenty. Louis Isbell says we're showing too many pictures of JT in a USC uniform. You gotta understand, we've only got so many pictures. This is coronavirus. We don't have 1,000 photographers rolling the streets of college football the way we used to. In some cases, we just got to use the pictures that we have. But I think we've got a lot more. We've been showing a lot more JT in the Georgia uniform lately. Honestly, that to me has actually been the most amazing part of this year, that without photographers and things like that, we found, and UGA itself has been pretty helpful with this, but we found a way to still give you some images, because those images matter. And there are no photographers on these sidelines these days. So in this particular case, I'm going to defend my colleagues and say we're doing the best we can to get any images on the screen at the moment. GB2 says if JT comes back in 2021, what wide receiver will lead the team with yards and touchdowns? Well, first of all, my anticipation is that Daniels will return for this upcoming season. That's my best, the 2021 season. That's my best guess. And I think the guys that you see used right now will be the ones that you should expect big things for next year. Pickens, Burton, and Kearis Jackson. That's, by the way, even true if you were to assume for a moment that the Dominic Blaylock comes back healthy. My assumption is that certainly he's going to work very hard to do so. But the experience that trio that I just described is getting right now, that really matters. Now, there's room to get more receivers involved, but the fact that you are throwing as much as you are to Burton right now, that experience really is going to help him. And Pickens the same way. And you can lament the fact that Pickens hasn't gotten enough touches. But I think that's more of a byproduct of an offense that's still very much a work in progress, more so than it is anything else. And Kearis Jackson, I think, is emerging as a real weapon. Bigger role for Arian Smith, obviously that's a possibility. Healthy return eventually of Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, you hope so. And Dominic Blaylock has proven himself to be a factor. It is really exciting for me to think about that as you head towards next season. I love preseason magazines and things like that. That when you see the list of top position groups, units in the SEC and around the country, that Georgia's receiving group is going to start showing up on some of those lists. That's not commonly been something that we've discussed, but for next season, it certainly could be. All right, we're going to have to end it right there for today. Well, I appreciate you being a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here on our program. And let me also remind you, check out the AJC for your Atlanta news now. All of the important information happening in our city, continued drama, and we don't talk politics on here. I talked about this off the top of the show. We don't do that kind of stuff on the show, but it is important to know what's going on in your world. So presidential recount that I believe is still ongoing, the upcoming senatorial races, the January runoff for that, a really good coverage of that, ajc.com on Atlanta News Now. Make sure you check all of that out there on that. Here's what else in the AJC today, a little bit of a look at how the vaccines could potentially be distributed in and around certain counties in Georgia like Gwinnett, once that's more readily available. Interesting reading there on that. Also some interesting Atlanta restaurant news that you can check out. Big new restaurant opening, which is always an exciting thing to think about. And of course, plenty of sports news there as well. Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. Make sure you check that out. Thanks for being here on our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Find out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. And of course, I'll see you back here tomorrow morning from my house once again, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.